What if the only person brave enough to tell the truth is an 8-year-old girl holding a threadbare stuffed bunny? What if the life of her father, accused of a violent crime he swears he didn't commit, rests on the courage of a child no one is ready to believe? And what happens when that small voice, clear and unwavering, shatters the silence of a courtroom convinced of his guilt? As secrets unravel and hidden motives surface, can Emily's quiet determination expose the real culprit before it's too late? This is the story of innocence on trial, of a family fighting to hold on to hope, and of a young girl who refuses to let the truth be buried, no matter the cost. Join us in reflecting on this true story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification for more daily stories like this. Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you are watching. For we would love to hear from you. The courtroom was so still that the very air seemed to tremble with anticipation. Emily, an 8-year-old girl clutching a threadbare stuffed bunny, sat on the witness stand. Her legs dangled over the edge of the seat, and her wide eyes darted between the judge, the jury, and her father, Matt Thompson, who waited at the defense table. Nobody seemed quite ready for what she had to say. "All I said," Emily repeated carefully, her small voice echoing through the hushed room, "is that Daddy didn't hurt Mr. Richards." "I know who did." Gasps rippled across the gallery. The prosecutor looked visibly startled, rifling through his papers as if he'd missed a crucial detail. Emily's mother, Sarah, pressed trembling fingers to her lips, tears beginning to streak her cheeks. Even Matt, hollow-eyed and weary from weeks of incarceration, turned toward his daughter with a spark of hope glimmering in his gaze. The judge, gavel in hand, leaned forward. "Emily," he said gently, "can you tell us more about what you saw or heard?" Before she could finish, the prosecutor leapt to his feet. "Objection!" he shouted, citing her young age and potential unreliability. But the judge silenced him with a firm rap of the gavel, granting Emily a chance to speak. Watching it all unfold, Emily thought about how quickly life had changed. Not too long ago, the Thompsons were a typical suburban family. She loved chasing fireflies on warm summer nights and baking cookies with Sarah on quiet weekends. Matt, devoted and fun-loving, was Emily's hero, always game for her impromptu tea parties or treehouse adventures. Their home overflowed with comfort and laughter. That peaceful world shattered one night when the flashing red and blue lights of police cars filled their driveway. Emily stood on the staircase in her pajamas, Bunny clutched in her arms, as officers handcuffed Matt and led him away. Her young mind could barely grasp what was happening. One moment, she'd been safely tucked in bed, and the next, her father was gone. In the days that followed, the accusations piled up. Matt had supposedly attacked their neighbor, Mr. Richards, leaving him for dead. Even worse, Matt's wallet was found near the scene, and his fingerprints were discovered on Mr. Richards's back door. The evidence looked damning. The neighborhood rumor mill churned with cruel efficiency, labeling Matt a dangerous criminal. Sarah worked extra shifts as a nurse to pay for a defense lawyer, Mr. Grayson, but the mounting legal fees were crippling. Emily's once friendly classmates eyed her warily, some whispering that her father was a monster. She learned, heartbreakingly fast, how adults often believed the worst when it was easier than seeking the truth. Still, in her heart, Emily clung to the certainty that Matt was innocent. He was her dad, the person who taught her how to ride a bike, who soothed her with silly songs when she was sad, who reminded her every day how loved she was. One evening, while Sarah was at work, Emily was out in the backyard hugging her bunny and trying not to cry. She overheard two police officers in front of Mr. Richards's house, their low voices drifting over the fence. One officer expressed doubts about the case, referencing other unsolved break-ins in the same area. Emily's ears perked up. Could there be a pattern the adults were missing? She tried telling Sarah, but her mother was exhausted and distracted. So Emily decided she'd gather information on her own. A clandestine visit to her dad's lawyer's office, under the pretense of looking for the restroom, allowed her to glance at the case files. She noticed a few suspicious details, Mr. Richards had argued with another neighbor, Mr. Baldwin, about money. Cameras had been tampered with right before the attack, and none of it seemed to add up perfectly against Matt. When the trial finally began, Emily insisted on attending. She sat quietly in the back, recording stray comments in a pink diary whenever she overheard lawyers and witnesses whisper. That led her to the fateful moment on the stand, where she found the courage to speak about what she had seen and heard. The room erupted with tension and disbelief. Yet amid the turmoil, Emily glanced at a pale, nervous-looking Mr. Baldwin, seated off to one side of the courtroom. Just then, the judge called for order, his voice booming across the silent aisles. Emily tightened her hold on her bunny. Whatever happened next, she was determined to help her father. If the truth was out there, she would bring it into the light, no matter how many objections or glares came her way. With a shaky breath, Emily looked at the judge and then at Mr. Baldwin. Her role in this fight for her dad's innocence had only just begun. The moment the judge dismissed the courtroom for a short recess, a flurry of voices erupted. Emily hopped down from the witness stand, her legs still shaking from the adrenaline rush of her testimony. She rushed into Sarah's open arms. They held each other tightly, each drawing strength from the other. Mr. Grayson, Matt's lawyer, approached them cautiously. "Emily," he said, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "What you set up there, that you've seen Mr. Baldwin near Mr. Richards' security camera, is important. Can you show me where you wrote that down?" He nodded toward the little pink diary peeking out her backpack. Emily handed it over, biting her lip. "I wrote everything I heard or saw," she said. "I didn't want to forget." Mr. Grayson flipped through the diary with careful deliberation. His eyes widened at certain passages. "This is extremely detailed," he murmured, almost in awe. "You might have just opened a new door in this case." Meanwhile, the prosecutor, Mr. Collins, paced the hallway with a phone pressed to his ear, his tone tense and urgent. Emily caught stray words like evidence and counter-argument, reminding her that he intended to keep Matt behind bars. Yet her confidence grew from Mr. Grayson's reaction. If her observations and overheard snippets were meaningful, maybe she could truly prove her father's innocence. Once court resumed, tension hung over the room. This time, the prosecutor tried discrediting Emily, pointing out her age and suggesting her imagination might be running wild. Mr. Grayson objected, insisting that her diary notes be examined. The judge allowed a preliminary review, and the atmosphere simmered with anticipation. All eyes turned to Mr. Baldwin, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was a widower who had generally kept to himself, earning a reputation for irritability. Despite that, he'd always seemed harmless, until Emily mentioned seeing him on Mr. Richards' property near the time of the attack. If her memory was accurate, it cast a huge shadow of doubt on his role in the unfolding drama. Outside the courtroom, Sarah tried to reassure Emily. "We're closer, honey. You did so well. Whatever happens, your dad knows how hard you're fighting." But Emily sensed that Sarah was still overwhelmed, her mind likely juggling hospital shifts, unpaid bills, and the weight of being the one adult family member still free. Over the following days, Emily's diary became a focal point. Investigators discovered that the broken security camera had indeed been tampered with in a way that matched what Emily described. Mr. Grayson argued that if Mr. Baldwin had the means to manipulate the camera, he could also have orchestrated the crime. More importantly, it pointed away from Matt, whose supposed involvement was looking shakier by the minute. The turn of events rattled the prosecutor. He'd based much of his case on Matt's wallet near the scene and the single eyewitness who thought he saw Matt leaving Mr. Richards' property. Now, new questions emerged. Why did Mr. Baldwin have a dispute with Mr. Richards over money? Could he have stolen Matt's wallet to plant evidence? The more the defense team looked, the more plausible alternative explanations they found. Emily picked up on subtle signals in the courtroom. The way Mr. Baldwin averted his gaze whenever certain questions arose, or how the prosecutor's posture stiffened whenever the defense mentioned the other unsolved break-ins in the neighborhood. She suspected the prosecutor might be ignoring leads that contradicted his neat, straightforward case against Matt. Then came the day a piece of new evidence was unearthed. The tampered security camera had partial fingerprints on the inside of its casing, fingerprints that didn't belong to Matt. They were inconclusive enough that they couldn't be fully identified. But the presence alone was damning to the prosecution's argument. Courtroom gossip soared. Could those prints be Mr. Baldwin's or someone else's altogether? Mr. Baldwin maintained a stoic front, but Emily noticed how he started avoiding eye contact. Whenever the judge adjourned, he nearly bolted from his seat. She also caught him speaking in hushed, tense tones with a lawyer she'd never seen before. That woman, presumably Mr. Baldwin's counsel, had a hawk-like stare and seemed intent on controlling every aspect of the narrative. Despite the cracks forming in the prosecution's case, Matt still languished in jail each night. Sarah visited daily, though exhaustion etched deeper lines into her face. Emily felt guilty that she couldn't do more, but her determination to see the truth come out only grew. On a Friday afternoon, the tension hit a boiling point. As the judge was about to wrap the session, Mr. Grayson requested that Mr. Baldwin be put on the stand for questioning. The gallery collectively leaned forward. Mr. Baldwin's lawyer objected vehemently, calling it unnecessary and harassment. But the judge, having seen enough suspicious signs, agreed that Baldwin's testimony was crucial. A date was set for the following week, and the courtroom buzzed with speculation. The instant Mr. Baldwin exited the building, reporters swarmed him. His face, usually composed, reddened with apparent anger or fear, perhaps both. Emily watched from a distance, hand clasped in her mother's. A small part of her felt triumphant, but another part was terrified. If Mr. Baldwin truly was involved, he might lash out to protect himself. Still, as she squeezed Sarah's hand, Emily resolved to stand firm. She would not let her father rot in jail for a crime he didn't commit. Whatever secrets Mr. Baldwin was hiding, she felt certain they were about to come crashing down. The courthouse was swarmed with media on the day Mr. Baldwin was scheduled to testify. Emily's heart fluttered as she stepped out of the car with Sarah, the early morning sun glinting off the camera lenses aimed in their direction. While most reporters clamored for sound bites from the lawyers, a few recognized Emily, the courageous little girl whose unexpected words in court had turned the case upside down. Inside, an uneasy quiet settled as people took their seats. The judge called the session to order. Mr. Baldwin, pale and visibly tense, took the stand. The bailiff had to repeat the oath twice because Baldwin mumbled his responses. Once settled, he folded his hands in his lap, his knuckles turning white. Mr. Grayson approached, his voice steady. Mr. Baldwin, could you please describe your relationship with Mr. Richards leading up to the night of the attack? Baldwin's gaze flitted to the side. We were neighbors for years, he said. We had occasional disagreements, but nothing serious. His response was clipped, as though he'd rehearsed it. What about financial disputes? Mr. Grayson pressed, flipping open a folder. Is it true you had an argument with Mr. Richards about money he owed you, or money you owed him? A flicker of panic crossed Baldwin's eyes before he forced a tight smile. Not that I recall. Whatever rumor is going around is baseless. His lawyer fidgeted at the defense table, clearly on edge. Mr. Grayson displayed documents that showed Mr. Baldwin and Mr. Richards had indeed quarreled over an unpaid debt. Emily glanced toward Sarah and saw her mother's face tighten with concern. The angle was clear. If Baldwin had a dispute with Mr. Richards, it provided motive to harm him. Perhaps he staged the entire scenario to frame Matt. Sweat beaded on Baldwin's forehead as he attempted to dodge direct answers. He repeated phrases like, I don't recall, and you'd have to ask Mr. Richards. When pressed about being near the security camera, Baldwin insisted, I was only checking on his property, making sure everything was secure. Mr. Richards was out of town that week, but the uneasy shifting of his posture told a different story. At one point, the prosecutor attempted to steer the conversation back to Matt's alleged guilt, arguing that none of this overshadowed the presence of Matt's wallet at the crime scene. Tension hung thick in the air. Mr. Grayson countered by suggesting the wallet could have been planted. An officer took the stand, and admitted it was theoretically possible. The prosecutor seethed. It was during a short recess that a major turn of events occurred. Emily and Sarah were in the courthouse hallway when they noticed a commotion by the main entrance. Uniformed officers were rushing past the security gate, barking urgent orders into their radios. Moments later, Detective Harris, whom Emily recognized from earlier parts of the investigation, stormed through the corridor, looking grim. He paused when he saw Emily and Sarah. "I need to find Mr. Grayson right now," he said quickly. Then, noticing the alarm in their expressions, he added, "There's new evidence suggesting Mr. Baldwin may not have acted alone." Sarah's face went pale. "What do you mean?" Detective Harris hesitated, eyeing Emily as if unsure how much to reveal in front of a child. Then he spoke in a lowered voice. "We got a tip about another individual, Frank Mitchell, who might be connected to the break-ins in this neighborhood and possibly Mr. Richards' assault. We'll know more soon." Emily felt an icy knot tighten in her chest. If there was another suspect besides Baldwin, could it mean an entire ring of criminal activity? Did that further prove Matt's innocence, or complicate matters by casting doubt on the entire investigation? Sarah led Emily to a quiet corner, her hands shaking. "Honey, no matter what happens, we have to stay calm. If the police think there's someone else involved, it might help your dad, but it also means the case is bigger than we thought." They returned to the courtroom, which was now buzzing with tension. Word had spread that a second suspect was in play. The judge convened the session, looking stern as he questioned both sides about new developments. The prosecutor attempted to downplay any mention of Frank Mitchell, wanting to keep the focus on Matt's alleged crimes. But Mr. Grayson latched onto the rumor, pushing for an official statement from the police. Eventually, Detective Harris himself was called to the stand to clarify the situation. He explained that an anonymous tip pointed to Frank Mitchell, a known associate of Mr. Baldwin, who had a prior record for theft and assault. The timeline of Mitchell's communications matched suspicious gaps in Baldwin's own phone records. While the details were still murky, there was enough to suspect that Matt might be a scapegoat. Emily saw the shock on the jurors' faces. The puzzle had suddenly expanded, revealing new pieces nobody realized were missing. Meanwhile, Baldwin's composure wavered. He clenched his jaw, eyes flicking nervously. If Mitchell was about to be implicated, what secrets might he reveal? By the end of the day, the court adjourned with instructions that both counsel investigate the Mitchell connection. Matt remained in custody, but for the first time, a tangible sense of optimism rose among the defense. Sarah hugged Emily outside the courthouse and whispered, "We might finally be getting closer to proving your dad's innocence." Emily nodded, though her heart pounded with anticipation and dread. The more layers they uncovered, the more dangers it seemed to bring. A single question echoed in her mind. If Frank Mitchell was part of this, how far would he go to hide the truth? In the days following the revelation about Frank Mitchell, a new urgency took hold of the investigation. Emily kept meticulous notes in her diary, even though she was just a child grappling with adult-sized worries. Sarah noticed the strain on her daughter, but also recognized Emily's unwavering determination. Mr. Grayson filed multiple requests to interview Frank Mitchell. The police, working off a partial address and outdated records, searched tirelessly. It didn't take long for Detective Harris to confirm that Mitchell had vanished without a trace. His last known location was tied to a series of break-ins similar to Mr. Richards' case, reinforcing the theory that Matt was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. When news broke that Frank Mitchell had disappeared, Emily felt a jolt of fear. If Mitchell was on the run, that meant he was desperate, and desperate people, she'd learned, often did reckless things. Sarah tried to shield her from the worst of it, but the tension at home was undeniable. Their small living room became a temporary command center of sorts, cluttered with paperwork, phone messages, and Detective Harris's regular updates. One evening, an exhausted Sarah sank onto the couch. Emily sat beside her, hugging her stuffed bunny. "Mom," she said quietly, "do you think Frank Mitchell hurt Mr. Richards? Or was it Mr. Baldwin? Or both?" Sarah exhaled. "I don't know, sweetie. but I do know your dad wouldn't hurt anyone. She brushed a stray lock of hair from Emily's forehead. We keep going until we uncover the truth. The next morning brought an unexpected twist. A call from the hospital informed the Thompsons that Mr. Richards had woken briefly, though he was still in fragile condition. He had few memories of the night he was attacked, but he recalled hearing two voices. He couldn't identify them with certainty, which left the investigators no closer to a solid conclusion. But it hinted that more than one person was definitely involved. Court proceedings marched onward, with the prosecution scrambling to patch up the holes in their case against Matt. Emily watched each day as attorneys argued, detectives testified, and evidence was re-examined. The main question that loomed was whether Frank Mitchell had conspired with Mr. Baldwin to assault Mr. Richards and to set Matt up as the fall guy. If that could be proven, it would blow the entire case against Matt to pieces. Suddenly, late one night, the phone at the Thompson house rang. Sarah, half asleep, answered in a shaky voice. Emily watched her mother's expression turn rigid with fear. "Who is this?" Sarah demanded, but no one responded. Then, in a low, menacing tone, a man said, "Stop asking questions," and the line went dead. Sarah reported the call to Detective Harris immediately. Emily stood by, terror leaping in her chest. Was it Frank Mitchell? Someone else? Did this mean they were being watched? The uncertainty wore on them, amplifying every creak in the floorboards at night. A few days later, tensions exploded. Police sirens howled through the neighborhood as half a dozen squad cars tore down the Thompson Street. Emily peered out her bedroom window to see red and blue lights reflecting off the windows. An officer banged on their front door, and Sarah ushered Emily behind her cautiously. Detective Harris entered, breathless. "We found Mitchell," he announced. "He tried to break into your house." A chill descended over the room. Sarah's knuckles turned white against the doorframe. Emily's heart threatened to hammer right out of her chest. Mitchell had apparently smashed a window on the side of the house, but fled when he spotted police patrols. Officers found footprints leading away, along with evidence suggesting he may have been searching for something. The question was, what? Matt, still behind bars, was notified of the incident. Mr. Grayson sped up efforts to get Matt out on bail, arguing that the real danger was from the at-large suspect, not an innocent father. But the wheels of the legal system turned slowly. Detective Harris called a meeting at the police station the next afternoon, inviting Sarah, Emily, and Mr. Grayson. There, he spread out new findings on a conference table, partial records, phone logs, and references to a hidden stash of money that Baldwin and Mitchell might have stolen. The possibility that Mr. Richards was set to expose them for embezzlement or theft was growing stronger. "We also uncovered a clue linking Mr. Baldwin to that money," Harris said, tapping a document. "He had large, unexplained deposits right around the time Mr. Richards was attacked. If we can tie those to Mitchell's activity, we'll have the evidence to clear Matt." At the mention of her dad, Emily clenched her fists. "So what can we do next?" she asked, her voice quavering with impatience. Harris looked at her with a mix of admiration and caution. "We track Mitchell down and figure out if he was coordinating with Baldwin. Then we tie it together. For your father, the best thing we can do is find proof that Baldwin and Mitchell set him up." As the meeting ended, Sarah squeezed Emily's hand. "We're so close, Em," she whispered. "We just need a little more time." Yet even as they left, the unsettling sense of being followed lingered. Emily couldn't shake the suspicion that Mitchell, or possibly someone else involved, was watching every move they made. Everything hinged on capturing a slippery suspect who'd already shown he had no qualms about threats or violence. That night, as Emily tried to sleep, she couldn't stop picturing shadows outside her window. In her diary, she wrote, "Finding the truth can be scary, but I have to keep going. Dad's counting on me." The swirl of fear in her chest was matched only by her steadfast resolve. 2 weeks later, the neighborhood was on edge. Police cars still patrolled the Thompson house, and Detective Harris called regularly with cautious updates. Frank Mitchell had been sighted, then lost. Leads had fizzled, then revived. Emily lived in a constant state of alert, her pink diary overflowing with small details she gathered each day. At last, a major breakthrough came when a pair of officers cornered Mitchell near an abandoned warehouse. He tried to flee, but he was caught and tackled to the ground. Emily, at home with Sarah, learned the news through a phone call from Detective Harris, his tone urgent and triumphant. "We have him in custody," he said. "I think this is the final piece of the puzzle." Relief coursed through Emily, mingled with dread. Mitchell was dangerous. What if he refused to talk? But the next morning, under heavy guard, Mitchell faced Detective Harris, Sarah, and Mr. Grayson for questioning. Emily was kept at a distance, both for her safety and because of her age, yet she heard accounts later from Mr. Grayson about the interrogation. At first, Mitchell was belligerent, insisting he had no idea who Matt Thompson even was. Then, caught in his own lies, he began to spin a story that implicated Mr. Baldwin. According to Mitchell, Baldwin orchestrated the attack on Mr. Richards to keep him quiet about stolen funds from their old construction projects. Matt Thompson was nothing but a scapegoat. Baldwin, Mitchell said, had even provided Matt's wallet, planted at the scene to steer suspicion toward an innocent man. When confronted with physical evidence, including the tampered security camera logs and the timeline matching Baldwin's visits to Mr. Richards, Mitchell finally broke down. He admitted that both he and Baldwin feared Mr. Richards would go public with their crimes. They planned the assault, but Mitchell claimed he never intended for it to be so brutal. Baldwin, he insisted, was the one who pulled the gun. With Mitchell's confession, the legal tide turned swiftly. Matt Thompson's case was reevaluated. The prosecution dropped all charges against him once the recorded confession and corroborating evidence came to light. Within days, Matt was released from jail, free to return home at last. The sight of Matt stepping out of the county detention center was a moment Emily would never forget. She ran into his open arms, her bunny bouncing against her chest. Sarah enveloped them both, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. For the first time in months, the Thompson family felt whole. Yet the story didn't end there. Mr. Baldwin was promptly arrested and charged with multiple felonies. In court, a new trial unfolded, this time with Baldwin as the defendant. Mitchell's testimony, combined with logs of phone calls, financial transactions, and Emily's earlier diary entries, formed an airtight case. Mr. Richards, still healing but now alert enough to speak, gave a powerful account of how Baldwin had confronted him about the missing money before violence erupted. A hush fell over the courtroom the day the jury returned. Emily, Sarah, and Matt sat together, hands clasped. They barely breathed as the foreperson read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Emily let out a choked sob of relief, while Matt closed his eyes in silent gratitude. Reporters clamored around them outside the courthouse, but the Thompsons slipped away to share a private moment. The weight that had pressed down on them was finally lifted. In the following weeks, life began to take on a semblance of normalcy. Matt, though carrying scars from his wrongful imprisonment, tried to focus on the future. Sarah alternated between exhaustion and joy, relieved to have her husband back. Emily returned to school, facing classmates who looked at her with newfound respect. The Thompsons made a quiet pact to transform their ordeal into something meaningful. With the help of Mr. Grayson and a few supportive neighbors, they started talking about ways to guide other families caught in the same nightmare. Matt suggested founding a small organization dedicated to helping those falsely accused, people without the kind of support or luck that Emily had managed to muster for him. One sunny afternoon, Matt, Sarah, and Emily sat on their front porch, sipping lemonade and reflecting on the months behind them. The tension that once filled their home now gave way to laughter, albeit tinged with lingering aches and memories. Emily felt proud of her dad for wanting to help others. She felt equally proud of herself, though the entire experience had made her grow up faster than she ever expected. But just as they began to settle into a hopeful new chapter, a mysterious letter arrived in the mail. A single sentence scrawled in neat handwriting. The truth isn't always what it seems. No signature, no return address. Emily and Sarah exchanged uneasy looks. Was this some leftover threat or a clue about unanswered questions? They couldn't tell. While Sarah reached for her phone to call Detective Harris, Emily clutched her bunny, her mind already buzzing with possibilities. She had learned the hard way that even when one ordeal ends, another can begin. Still, the family had come too far to back down in fear. They'd learned that unity, trust, and courage could withstand almost anything. Whatever new mystery was brewing, they would face it together. In the wake of Matt's exoneration and Mr. Baldwin's conviction, the Thompson family emerged stronger than they ever imagined they could be. Their home, once overshadowed by sirens and flashing lights, began to fill again with the warmth of laughter and long-overdue peace. Though the scars from their ordeal ran deep, late-night flashbacks for Matt, anxious moments for Sarah, and lingering worries for Emily, they also discovered a renewed sense of purpose. Emily's unwavering courage proved that even the smallest voice could shine a light into the darkest corners. Sarah's fierce love and tireless work kept the family afloat when it seemed all hope was lost. And Matt, having felt the injustice of false accusations firsthand, resolved to help others facing similar nightmares. Together, they channeled the lessons they learned into a cause that could transform fear into compassion and doubt into empathy. Yet life seldom wraps up all loose ends neatly. The cryptic letter reminded them that remnants of the past might linger, and new challenges could emerge without warning. But the Thompsons no longer lived in fear of the unknown. They knew the power of truth and the resilience of a family bound by love. With each new day, they carried forward the belief that standing up for what's right, supporting one another, and remaining hopeful in the face of adversity could overcome any obstacle. The story of the Thompsons became a beacon for others, proving that a child's testimony, a mother's steadfast devotion, and a father's unwavering integrity could triumph over lies, schemes, and even the most daunting legal battles. And no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side, ready to protect each other and hold onto their hard-won hope.